Her voice on that 911 line was small, but every word carried a weight no child should have to bear. She'd lost her mama, and somewhere along the way, she'd started losing herself too. But what began as a cry for help turned into a lesson. Encourage one that would ripple far beyond her own little world. Before we dive into this, hit the subscribe button and tell us from where in the world you're watching from. Let me paint you a picture of Emma Henderson as she was that September morning. 7 years old, with hair the color of autumn leaves and eyes that seemed to hold too much sadness for someone so young. She was small for her age, the kind of child who seemed to fold in on herself, like a flower trying to protect its tender center from the world. Emma lived in a small house on Maple Street, the kind of neighborhood where everyone knows everyone else's business, or at least they think they do. White picket fences, manicured lawns, the American dream stretched out in neat little rows. But behind those perfect facades, my friend, behind those carefully maintained appearances, real life was happening. Messy, complicated, heartbreaking real life. The house at 847 Maple Street had been quiet for too long. It was the kind of quiet that settles in after loss, thick and suffocating, like a blanket that's too heavy, but you can't seem to push it away. Thomas Henderson, Emma's father, moved through that house like a ghost. He went through the motions of living, making breakfast, brushing his teeth, going to work. But anyone with eyes could see that part of him had died 6 months earlier when they buried his wife, Sarah Henderson. Lord, that woman was sunshine in human form. She had a laugh that could fill up a whole room and a way of making everyone around her feel like they mattered. She was the kind of mother who left little notes in Emma's lunchbox, who sang lullabies, even when her throat was raw from the treatments, who smiled even when the pain was eating her alive from the inside out. Cancer, you see. The kind that doesn't ask permission, doesn't care about dreams deferred or little girls who still need their mothers. It took Sarah Henderson piece by piece, day by day, until there was nothing left but memories and the echoes of laughter that used to fill that house on Maple Street. Now, grief. Grief is a strange beast, my friend. It doesn't follow rules or timelines. It doesn't care about what's convenient or appropriate. Thomas Henderson was drowning in his grief, and he didn't even realize he was taking his daughter down with him. Emma had been trying to be strong. Lord knows, that little girl had been trying so hard to what she thought everyone needed her to be. She made her own breakfast when her father forgot. She walked herself to school when he couldn't get out of bed. She sat in that big empty house, after school, doing homework at the kitchen table while her father stared at the television, seeing nothing. And she hurt. Oh, how that child hurt. But not in the way anyone expected. Asterisk, you see, in the weeks before Sarah died, when the pain medication wasn't working anymore and sitting upright was agony, Emma had watched her mother try every position imaginable to find some relief, lying on her side with pillows propped just so, sitting in that old recliner with her knees drawn up. But mostly, toward the end, Sarah had to sit in a very particular way, leaning forward, weight distributed carefully, finding positions that wouldn't aggravate the tumors pressing against her spine. Emma, being 7 and loving her mother more than life itself, had started copying those positions. She thought if she sat the way Mama sat, if she carried herself the way Mama carried herself when the pain was bad, maybe she could understand, maybe she could help. Maybe she could take some of that pain into her own small body and give her mother relief. It became a habit, sitting in those unnatural positions, perched on the edge of chairs with her back curved just so, kneeling on the floor with her weight shifted forward, standing more than sitting, because that's what Mama had to do toward the end. After the funeral, after the flowers wilted and the casseroles stopped coming, Emma kept sitting that way. It was her way of keeping her mother close her way of remembering, her way of trying to understand what it meant to hurt the way Mama hurt Dot with 7-year-old. Spines aren't meant to contort themselves day after day. 7-year-old. Muscles aren't designed to hold tension for hours at a time. And slowly, over the months, Emma's body began to rebel. Asterisk, by that September morning, Emma had been sitting in those painful positions for so long that her body had begun to adapt in ways that weren't healthy. Her spine had developed a curve that wasn't natural. Her muscles had tightened and knotted. And yes, my friend, it genuinely hurt when she tried to sit normally. But the deepest pain? The deepest pain wasn't in her back or her neck or her twisted little shoulders. The deepest pain was in her heart, in that empty place where her mother's love used to live, in the silence that had settled over 847 Maple Street like dust and abandoned furniture. That morning, Thomas had left for work without breakfast again. He'd kissed Emma's forehead absently and mumbled something about picking up dinner on the way home. The house felt bigger than usual, quieter than usual, and Emma sat at the kitchen table trying to eat cereal, all perched on the very edge of her chair, weight pitched forward just like Mama used to do. And it hurt. It hurt so bad that tears ran down her cheeks and dropped into her Lucky Charms, and she realized something that terrified more than anything else in her 7-year-old world. She didn't know who to tell. Asterisk, picture this, my friend. A little girl alone in a house that's too quiet, sitting at a table set for one, staring at a telephone on the wall like it might hold the answers to questions she doesn't even know how to ask. That Emma had been taught about 911, of course. Every child knows those 3 numbers: fire, police, emergency. But what constitutes an emergency? When you're 7 years old, and the thing that's broken isn't something you can point to or explain to grown-ups who seem to live in a completely different world than you do. Asterisk, at 9:47 that Tuesday morning, Emma Henderson made a decision that would ripple through the lives of everyone it touched. She climbed up on the kitchen chair, reached for that old rotary phone. Yes, my friend, they still had one of those ancient things, and with trembling fingers, she dialed 911. On the other end of that call was Mrs. Carol Stevens, a woman who had been answering emergency calls for the better part of 20 years. Carol had heard it all: heart attacks and house fires, domestic disputes and car accidents, overdoses and break-ins. She prided herself on staying calm, on being the steady voice in someone else's worstment. But nothing, absolutely nothing, had prepared her for the small, wavering voice that came through her headset that morning. 911, what's your emergency? Hello? The voice was so quiet, Carol had to adjust her volume. I need help, please. Okay, sweetheart. Can you tell me what kind of help you need? Voice becomes tender, and then, my friend, came those 4 words that would haunt Carol Stevens for months afterward. It hurts when I sit. Now, Carol had protocols. She had procedures. When a child calls 911, there are specific questions you ask, specific boxes you check. Is there an adult with you? Are you in immediate danger? Are you hurt? But something in Emma's voice, something in the way those words hung in the air like a prayer nobody knew how to answer, made Carol set aside her training and listen with her heart instead of her handbook. It hurts when you sit, honey? Can you tell me more about that? I try to sit like Mama used to sit when she was sick. But now it hurts all the time, and I don't know how to make it stop. Asterisk, Carol Stevens was a professional. She was trained to remain detached, to gather information efficiently, and dispatch the appropriate services. But in that moment, listening to this little voice talk about sitting like her sick mama, Carol felt her professional composure begin to crumble. Sweetheart, where is your mama now? The silence that followed was the kind of silence that speaks volumes. It was the silence of a child trying to figure out how to explain something She didn't fully understand hers. It was the silence of grief, too big for words. "She's with Jesus," Emma finally whispered. "Daddy says she's with Jesus, and she doesn't hurt anymore. But I still hurt, and I don't know why I still hurt when she doesn't." Lord have mercy. Lord have mercy on that little girl's heart. Carl Stevens had to mute her microphone for a moment to collect herself. In 20 years of emergency dispatch, she had never heard anything that cut straight through to her soul the way Emma's words did. Here was a child calling 911, not because Ophimedes had physical danger, but because she was drowning in a pain she couldn't name, couldn't explain, couldn't escape. "Honey, what's your name?" "Emma. Emma Henderson." "Emma, that's a beautiful name. Emma, is there a grown-up with you right now?" "No, ma'am. Daddy went to work. He goes to work every day and comes home very tired." Carol was already pulling up the address, already flagging this as a priority call, but she kept her voice calm, kept it gentle. "Emma, I'm going to send some very nice police officers to come talk to you, okay? They're going to help figure out how to make the hurting stop. Am I in trouble?" The fear in Emma's voice was palpable. "I tried to be good. I tried to sit like Mama so I could understand, but it just hurts so much now." "Oh, sweetheart, no. You're not in trouble. You're very brave for calling us. Very, very brave." Carol Stevens dispatched officers Jenny Martinez and David Chun to 847 Maple Street with instructions that this was a priority call involving a minor who appeared to be alone and in distress. What she didn't include in that dispatch, what she couldn't find words for, was the way Emma's voice had lodged itself in her chest like a splinter. The way those 4 simple words had revealed a complexity of pain that emergency protocols weren't designed to handle. As she ended the call, promising Emma that help was on the way, Carol Stevens did something she hadn't done in years of emergency dispatch work. She said a prayer for a little girl who was trying to understand hurt by mimicking it, who was trying to stay connected to her mother's memory by carrying her mother's pain. She prayed for Emma Henderson, and she prayed for the officers heading to Maple Street, because somehow Carol knew this wasn't going to be a routine call. This was going to be one of those calls that changes everyone it touches. One of those calls that reminds you why the work matters. Why showing up for strangers in their darksments is the most important thing any of us can do. The clock on Carol's desk read 9:52 a.m. when she hung up the phone. 5 minutes. 5 minutes that would change the trajectory of a little girl's life. 5 minutes that would set in motion a series of events that would touch an entire community. Sometimes, my friend, that's all it takes. Sometimes 5 minutes of someone listening, really. Listening to a child's pain is the difference between drowning and learning to swim. Officer Jenny Martinez had been patrolling the streets for 8 years, long enough to develop instincts about calls before she even arrived on scene. But as she and her partner David Chun pulled up to 847 Maple Street, something felt different about this one. The house looked normal enough. White siding, small front porch, a few toys scattered in the yard that looked like they hadn't been touched in months. But there was something about the stillness of the place, something about the way thick curtains were drawn tight against the morning sun, that made Jenny's gut tighten with concern. David Chun was newer to the force, only 2 years in, but he had something that couldn't taught in any police academy. He had a way with children that was pure gift. Maybe it came from being the oldest of 6 kids. Maybe it came from somewhere deeper, but children trusted David instinctively. Voice becomes more intimate. They approached the front door together, and Jenny knocked gently. "Emma, this is Officer Martinez. We're here to help, sweetheart." A door opened slowly, revealing a little girl who looked even smaller than her 7 years. Emma Henderson stood in the doorway, wearing pajama pants and an oversized shirt that probably belonged to her father. Her hair was uncombed, her face waist-ear streaked, and she was standing in a way that immediately caught Jenny's attention. The child wasn't standing normally. She was shifted to one side, weight on her left foot, shoulders canted at an angle that spoke of chronic discomfort. It was the posture of Simeon, who had been accommodating pain for so long that abnormal had become normal. "Hi, Emma," David said, crouching down to her eye level. "I'm Officer Chun. We got your call, and we're here to help. Can we come in and talk?" Emma nodded, but didn't move out of the doorway immediately. She studied both officers with eyes that seemed too old for her face, eyes that held the wariness of a child who had learned that adults sometimes leave, sometimes disappear when you need them most. "Are you going to take me away?" she asked quietly. Jenny's heart broke a little at the question. This wasn't a child afraid of punishment. This was a child afraid of abandonment. This was a child who had already lost too much. "No, sweetheart. We just want to understand how you're hurting and see if we can help make it better. Can you show us where it hurts?" Emma led them into the living room, and both officers immediately noticed the state of the house. It wasn't dirty, exactly, but it was the kind of neglect that comes from profound grief. Laundry folded, but not put away. Dishes clean, but stacked on counters. Everything functional, but nothing that spoke of a home where people were truly living instead of just existing. "It hurts when I try to sit," Emma said, demonstrating by perching on the edge of the couch in that same uncomfortable position they'd noticed at the door. "I sit like Mammouse to sit when her back hurt from being sick." David and Jenny exchanged glances. This wasn't what they had expected to find. "Emma," Jenny said gently, "can you sit normally for me? Just try it for a second." Emma attempted to sit back on the couch properly, but immediately winced and shifted forward again. "It feels wrong," she said. "It feels like I'm betraying Mama if I don't sit like she did." And there it was, my friend. The heart of the matter laid bare by a 7-year-old who didn't even understand what she was saying. Emma Henderson had been carrying her mother's pain, literally embodying it, for so long that her own body had begun to mirror physical distress that cancer had caused her mother. David sat down on the floor in front of Emma, his police radio crackling softly in the background. "Emma, can you tell us about your mama? What was she like when she wasn't sick?" For the first time since they'd arrived, Emma's face lit up. "She was beautiful," she said. "She had the same hair as me, and she sang songs when she cooked dinner, and she always knew exactly what to say when I had bad dreams." "That sounds like she was very special," Jenny said. "What did she like to do?" "She liked to garden. We had flowers in the backyard, and she taught me all their names, roses and daffodils, and—" Emma's voice trailed off, and the sadness crept back into her expression. "But then she got sick, and she couldn't garden anymore. She couldn't sit normal anymore. She had to sit all bent over, and she would cry sometimes when she thought I wasn't looking." So you started sitting like that too?" David asked gently. Emma nodded. "I thought if I could understand how it felt, maybe I could help her feel better. Maybe I could take some of the hurt away." Jenny had to look away for a moment to compose herself. In 8 years of police work, she had seen humanity at its worst: domestic violence, child abuse, senseless cruelty. But this was humanity at its most heartbreaking. This was a child's love so pure, so complete, that she had literally taken her mother's pain into her own body. "Emma," Jenny said, "where is your daddy right now?" "At work. He works at the insurance company downtown. He leaves early and comes home late, and he's always sad." "Does he know that it hurts when you sit?" Emma shook her head. "He doesn't talk much anymore. Not since Mama died. I tried to tail him once, but he was crying, and I didn't want to make him more sad. Asterisk David was already reaching for his radio to call for additional resources, a social worker, a family crisis counselor, someone trained to help a family navigate grief this profound. But as he was about to key the microphone, Emma spoke again. "There's a letter," she said quietly. "Mama wrote me a letter before she went to heaven. It's in her room. Daddy doesn't know about it." Jenny and David looked at each other. "Can you show us the letter, Emma?" The little girl nodded and stood up, immediately resuming that painful, twisted posture that had become her normal. She led them upstairs to a bedroom that had clearly been left untouched since Sarah Henderson's death. The bed was made that there was dust on the surfaces, and the air held that stale quality of a room where no one breathed a sanimore. Emma went to the dresser and opened the top drawer, pulling out an envelope with her name written on it in shaky handwriting. "She gave this to me the night before she went to the hospital the last time. She said to read it when I felt really, really sad and didn't know what to do." Asterisk Jenny took the letter with hands that weren't quite steady. Inside, written in the careful script of a woman who knew she was writing her final words to her daughter, was a message that would change everything. "My dearest Emma, if you're reading this, it means I've had to go somewhere. I can't take you with me. I know that hurts, baby girl. I know you don't understand why mamas have to leave sometimes when their little girls need them most. I need you to know something very important. The pain I had to carry, that wasn't meant for you. That was mine to bear, and mine alone. You were never supposed to take that pain into your little body. You were never supposed to carry what was too heavy for even a grown-up to carry. I see you, sweetheart. I see you trying to sit like I sat, trying to understand what it felt like to hurt the way I hurt. But Emma, love, that's not your job. Your job is to be 7 years old. Your job is to run and play and laugh and dream about tomorrow. The greatest gift you could ever give me is to be happy, to find joy again, to let the grown-ups help you when you're hurting, instead of trying to carry everything by yourself. Take care of Daddy for me. He's going to be sad for a while, but he loves you more than all the stars in the sky. And when the hurt gets too big to carry by yourself, promise me I'll ask for help. Promise me you won't try to be brave all by yourself. I love you bigger than the universe, baby girl. Now stop trying to carry my pain and goal of the beautiful life I always dreamed you'd have got forever and always, Mama." By the time Jenny finished reading that letter aloud, all three of them were crying. Emma because she finally understood that her mama hadn't wanted her to hurt. Jenny because she was witnessing the kind of love that transcends death. And David because he was seeing the power of a mother's wisdom reaching across the veil to heal her child's heart. "Emma," Jenny said softly, "your mama was very smart. She knew you might try to take her pain because that's what people do when they love someone. But she didn't want it for you. So ... So it's okay if I sit normal? It's okay if I don't hurt like she hurt? It's not just okay, sweetheart. It's what she wanted most in the world." Asterisk. The next few hours unfolded like a miracle, in slow motion, my friend. David Chun stayed with Emma while Jenny Martinez drove to the insurance office downtown to find Thomas Henderson. She walked into that sterile building with its fluorescent lights and cubicles full of people, processing other people's catastrophes. And she asked to speak with Thomas immediately. When they told him a police officer needed to speak with him about his daughter, Thomas's face went white as hospital sheets. He was running before Jenny could explain, certain that something terrible had happened, that he had lost Emma too, that this grief had blinded him to some danger that had taken his baby girl. Asterisk, you have to understand, Thomas Henderson was a man drowning. For 6 months, had been going through the motions of living while feeling like he was suffocating under the weight of his loss. He loved Emma more than his own life, but grief had stolen his ability to see past his own pain. He was a good man crushed by circumstances beyond his control, trying to be a father when he barely knew how to exist. Jenny met him in the lobby of his office building, and the first words out of her mouth were, "Emma's safe. She's okay. But we need to talk." The drive back to Maple Street was 20 minutes of Thomas Henderson learning that his daughter had been suffering in silence. While he wandered through his own darkness, Jenny told him about the call, about Emma's posture, about the letter from Sarah. She watched in her rearview mirror as this broken man came face to face with how his grief had inadvertently neglected the one person he loved most. When they walked into the house, Emma was sitting on the living room floor with Officer Chen, and for the first time in months, she was sitting normally. Her legs were crossed comfortably, her back was straight but relaxed, and she was showing David a photoalbum full of pictures of her mother. "Daddy!" Emma jumped up and ran to her father, wrapping her arms around his waist. Thomas knelt down and held his daughter like he was afraid she might disappear, like he was trying to memorize the feel of her small body against his chest. "I'm sorry," he whispered into her hair. "I'm so sorry, baby. I didn't know you were hurting. I didn't know you needed help." It's okay, Daddy," Emma said. "Mama wrote me a letter. She said it's okay to ask for help when things get too big to carry by ourselves." Thomas looked up at the officers with tears streaming down his face. "What do we do? How do I fix this? How do I be the father she needs when I don't even know how to get through each day myself?" Jenny Martinez had seen a lot of broken families in her 8 years on the force. She had delivered bad news and good news, had been present for the worst moments and occasionally the best moments of people's lives. But she had never been part of something quite like this, a moment where a family could either fall apart completely or begin the hard work of healing together. "You start by getting help," she said, "both of you. Emma needs to see a doctor about the physical effects of the positions she's been holding her body in. And both of you need to talk to someone who understands grief, who can help you figure out how to carry this loss together instead of drowning in it separately." David Chun pulled out his phone and started making calls. He contacted the family crisis counselor attached to their department. He called the pediatric clinic at the county hospital and explained the situation to a nurse who promised to squeeze Emma in that afternoon. He reached out to a grief counselor who specialized in helping children and families navigate loss. Within 2 hours, Emma Henderson had gone from a little girl suffering alone to a little girl surrounded by a network of people committed to helping her heal. The doctor's visit revealed what the officers had suspected. Months of holding her body in unnatural positions had caused muscle tension, minor spinal misalignment, and chronic pain that would require physical therapy to correct. But the doctor assured them that, with proper treatment and time, Emma's body could heal completely. The grief counselor, Dr. Maria Santos, met with Thomas and Emma together that first day. She explained that children often internalize the symptoms of trauma and loss in physical ways, that Emma's behavior was actually a common response to watching our parents suffer and die. Emma was trying to understand her mother's experience. Dr. Santos explained to Thomas. She was trying to maintain connection. In a way, her body became a living memorial to her mother's pain. But healing means learning to honor her mother's memory through joy and health, not through suffering. For Emma, the healing began with permission. Permission to sit normally. Permission to play. Permission to be happy without feeling like she was betraying her mother's memory. Permission to be 7 years old instead of carrying burdens meant for adults. For Thomas, the healing began with recognition. Recognition that his grief, while valid and necessary, had created a vacuum where Emma's needs should have been met. Recognition that loving Sarah's memory meant taking care of the daughter she had loved more than life itself. But here's the thing about healing, my friend. It's not a straight line. It's not a simple matter of identifying the problem and fixing it. Healing is messy and complicated and full of setbacks and small victories. Emma had to learn how to sit normally again. Literally, her muscles had to remember how to hold her body in healthy positions. She had to practice being comfortable, practice taking up space, practice believing that she deserved to feel good in her own skin. Thomas had to learn how to be present again. He had to practice seeing past his own pain to recognize his daughter's needs. He had to learn how to grieve for his wife while still being a father to his child. They had to learn how to talk to each other again, how to share their sadness without being overwhelmed by it, how to remember Sarah with joy instead of just with tears. But the most important thing they had to learn was something that took months to truly understand, that asking for help isn't a sign of weakness. It's a sign of love. Emma's 911 call wasn't just a cry for help for herself. It was a cry for help for her whole family. It was a 7-year-old girl recognizing that the adults in her life were drowning and throwing them a lifeline. And sometimes, my friend, that's exactly what it takes. Sometimes it takes the wisdom of a child to show the adults how to find their way back to the light. Now, you might think that's where this story ends, my friend. Little girl gets help. Father wakes up from his grief. Family begins to heal. And that would be a beautiful story all by itself. But sometimes, just sometimes, one act of courage creates ripples that spread far beyond what anyone could have imagined. Word began to spread through the neighborhood about Emma Henderson's 911 call. Not gossip kind of spreading, mind you, but the kind of quiet sharing that happens when something touches people's hearts so deeply that they can't help but talk about it. Mrs. Patterson from next door, who had been watching that house on Maple Street with increasing concern, but hadn't known how to help. Mr. and Mrs. Chun from across the street, who had young children of their own and had been wondering how to explain death and loss to little minds. The teachers at Emma's school, who had noticed her withdrawal and poor posture, but hadn't understood the connection to her grief. Officer Jenny Martinez found herself thinking about Emma's story long after her shift ended. She started researching childhood grief, started learning about the ways children process loss differently than adults. She began to realize how many calls she had taken over the years that might have been prevented if families had better resources. For dealing with trauma and loss. Jenny started volunteering with the local children's hospital, teaching other officers how to recognize signs of childhood grief and trauma. She developed a training program that will eventually be adopted by police departments in 3 surrounding counties. Officer David Chun couldn't stop thinking about that letter from Sarah Henderson. The way a dying mother had reached across time and death to heal her daughter's pain. Hester did visiting schools to talk to children about when and how to ask for help, about the difference between being brave and carrying burdens that were too heavy for their smallholders. But the biggest ripple of all came from Emma herself. As she began to heal, as her body learned to feel comfortable again, and her heart learned to carry grief without being crushed by it, Emma started noticing other children who seemed to be carrying invisible burdens. At school, at the grocery store, at the park, once you've been in pain, you develop a radar for recognizing it in others. There was Marcus, the boy in her 2nd grade class who flinched every time an adult spoke loudly, whose shoulders were always hunched like he was protecting himself from invisible blows. There was little Sophia, who lived 2 houses down and whose parents were going through a divorce so bitter that the child spent most of her time trying to be invisible, trying not to add to anyone's stress. There was Tommy, whose grandfather had died over the summer and who had started acting out in school because he didn't know how to express the confusion and anger that had settled in his chest like stones. Emma Henderson, all of 7 years old, became a voice for other children who were suffering in silence. She talked to her teacher, Miss Rodriguez, about the kids she was worried about. She asked her father to help her understand when it was appropriate to suggest that someone call for help. Most importantly, she started sharing her story. Not the details that were too private or too painful, but the essential truth that asking for help isn't shameful, that carrying pain alone makes everything harder, that there are adults whose job it is to help children when things get too big to handle alone. Asterisk 6 months after Emma's 911 call, her school organized what they called Helping Hands Day. It was a day dedicated to teaching children about resources available to them when they were struggling. School counselors, trusted adults, emergency services, helpline specifically for children. Emma spoke to an auditorium full of her peers about the importance of speaking up when you're hurting. She told them about her mother's letter, about how keeping pain sacred had made everything harder, about how the grown-ups in her life had been able to help once they understood what she needed. It's okay to hurt, she told a room full of children whose eyes were wide with recognition. But it's not okay to hurt all by yourself. There are people whose job it is to help, and they can't do their job if we don't tell them we need help. Asterisk, the local newspaper ran a story about Helping Hands Day. Then the regional paper picked it up. Then a television station in the state capital sent a reporter to interview Emma and her father about their journey through grief and healing. The story struck a chord that no one had expected. Phone calls started coming in from other communities, wanting to know how to implement their own Helping Hands programs. Mental health professionals reached out to share resources and offer support. Other families dealing with loss began sharing their own stories. Emma's simple 911 call, "It hurts when I sit," had become a catalyst for a broader conversation about childhood mental health, about the ways children process trauma, about the importance of teaching young people that seeking help is a sign of strength, not weakness. Asterisk. A year after that September morning, Governor Patricia Williams invited Emma Henderson to the state capitol to receive the Young Hero Award for her advocacy on behalf of children in crisis. Emma, now 8 years old and sitting comfortably upright in the governor's office, accepted the award with her father by her side. In her acceptance speech, because yes, this 8-year-old gave a speech to a room full of adults. Emma said, something that brought tears to eyes throughout the room. My mama always told me that when something is too big to carry by yourself, that doesn't mean you're not strong enough. It just means you need to find someone strong enough to help you carry it. I want every kid to know that asking for help is how strong people take care of themselves and the people they love. Asterisk, but perhaps the most profound ripple of all was one that took 2 years to fully manifest. Thomas Henderson, inspired by his daughter's courage and driven by a need to honor his wife's memory in a meaningful way, left his job at the insurance company and went back to school to become a family grief counselor. Sarah always said that our pain could become our purpose, he explained to a reporter on the day he graduated from his counseling program. Emma showed me that was true. Her courage to ask for help saved our family, and now I want to help other families find their way through the darkness. The Henderson family story became part of training materials for 911 dispatchers across the country. Carol Stevens, the operator who had taken Emma's call, worked with emergency services departments to develop protocols for recognizing when children's calls might indicate deeper family crises, requiring mental health intervention rather than just immediate emergency response. Asterisk. You see, my friend, what started as one little girl's physical pain had revealed something much deeper. A family system broken by grief, a community that didn't know how to support its most vulnerable members, and a society that hadn't taught its children. That emotional pain deserves the same urgent attention as physical injury. Emma's story became a teaching tool in medical schools, in social work programs, in police academies. It became a case study in how childhood trauma can manifest in unexpected ways, and how sometimes the most effective intervention is simply listening to what children are actually trying to tell us. 3 years after that first 911 call, Emma Henderson was featured on the cover of a national children's magazine under the headline, "The Girl Who Taught a Country to Listen." The article described how her simple act of courage had led to the establishment of children's advocacy programs in over 40 states, had influenced changes in emergency dispatch protocols, and had sparked a national conversation about the importance of mental health resources for families dealing with loss. But if you asked Emma about any of that, she would tell you something much simpler. She would tell you that she learned the most important lesson of her life from her mother's letter. That love means taking care of each other. And sometimes taking care of each other means being brave enough to say when you need help. Asterisk. The house at 847 Maple Street looks different now. The curtains are open, letting in the light. There are fresh flowers in the garden that Sarah started, and that Emma and Thomas tend together. There are pictures on the walls, not just of Sarah, though her memory is honored throughout the house, but new pictures too. Pictures of Emma receiving her award from the governor. Pictures of Thomas graduating from his counseling program. Pictures of birthday parties and school events and ordinary moments that speak of a family that has learned how to live with loss instead of being buried by it. Emma Henderson is 11 now, still small for her age, but no longer fragile. She sits normally, in chairs, runs without pain, and carries herself with the confidence of someone who knows that she is loved and supported and heard. She still misses her mother every single day, but she has learned to carry that love and loss in ways that honor Sarah's memory without destroying her own future. She volunteers at the Children's Hospital, reading to young patients and sharing her story with families who are walking the path she once walked. She speaks at conference about childhood advocacy, though she insists that her father drive her to school the next day like any normal kid, because being a young hero doesn't mean she doesn't still need to learn fractions and proper sentence structure. Asterisk. And Thomas? Thomas Henderson has become one of the most sought-after family grief counselors in the state. He specializes in helping families where children are trying to shoulder adult burdens, where love has become twisted into harmful patterns of protection and self-sacrifice. His office wall is covered with drawings from young clients, letters from families who have found their way back to each other, pictures of children who have learned that their job is to be children, not to carry the pain of the adults they love. But his most treasured possession is a framed copy of Sarah's letter to Emma, the letter that saved their family and launched a movement. Next to it hangs Emma's young herohood, but Thomas knows the truth. Emma wasn't heroic because she won an award. She was heroic because at 7 years old, she recognized that she needed help and was brave enough to ask for it. Now, my friend, I need to tell you about something that happened 2 years after Emma's first 911 call. Something that would transform not just the Henderson family, but would ripple out to touch lives in ways no one could have predicted. You see, sometimes the most powerful healing comes not from moving forward, but from discovering truths that were hidden in the past all along. Emma was 9 years old when the second letter arrived. It came on a Thursday afternoon in October, delivered by a postal worker who had no idea she was carrying a message that would change everything. The return address read, St. Mary's Hospital, Patient Affairs, and it was addressed to Thomas Henderson. Inside that official envelope was another envelope, yellowed with age, with "to be delivered 2 years after my death," written in Sarah Henderson's familiar handwriting. Along with it was a note from the hospital chaplain explaining that Sarah had left. Specific instructions for this delayed delivery. Asterisk. Thomas's hands shook as he opened his wife's final letter to him. But this wasn't just a letter to Thomas. It was a letter meant for both him and Emma, written during those last difficult weeks when Sarah knew she was running out of time, but still had so much she needed to say. Asterisk, my beloved Thomas and my precious Emma, if you're reading this, it means 2 years have passed since I've been gone. 2 years feels like forever when you're the one leaving, but I know it might feel like yesterday to you, who have to stay behind and learn to live without me. I'm writing this letter because I know things about grief that you don't know yet. I know that the first year will feel like drowning. I know that the second year will feel like learning to breathe underwater. And I know that somewhere around the 2-year mark, you might start to feel guilty for having moments where you forget to be sad. Thomas, my love, I need you to know that I see who you really are beneath this grief. You are the man who held my hand through every doctor's appointment, who learned to cook me favorite foods when I couldn't keep anything else down, who never once made me feel like my illness was a burden you didn't want to carry. You are the father who sang lullabies to Emma even when your own heart was breaking, who tried to be strong enough for all of us. But I also know you, Thomas Henderson. I know how you blame yourself for things beyond your control. I know how you disappear into yourself when pain gets too big to bear. And I'm afraid, so afraid, that my death will take you so deep into darkness, that you won't be able to find your way back to Emma. Emma, my beautiful, brilliant, brave little girl. By the time you read this, you'll be older, but I hope you still remember the sound of my voice reading you bedtime stories. I hope you still remember how we used to dance in the kitchen while dinner cooked. I hope you remember that you were the best part of every single day I got to spend on this earth. But, more than anything, I hope you've learned that being strong doesn't mean carrying pain alone. I hope you've learned that love isn't about taking on someone else's suffering. It's about helping each other find ways to heal. Asterisk now. Here's what I need to tell you both. What I couldn't say when I was dying, because it needed you to focus on. Loving me, not on worrying about what came next. I hid some things from you. Not because I wanted to lie, but because I wanted to protect you from fears that might never come true. There are things in this house, things I saved and planned, that I need you to find now that enough time has passed for you to be ready for them. Asterisk. The letter went on to describe a wooden box hidden in the attic, behind the Christmas decorations, containing what Sarah called her gifts for the future. Thomas and Emma climbed up to the attic that very evening, flashlight in hand, hearts pounding with a mixture of anticipation and grief. The box was exactly where Sarah said it would be, wrapped in one of her old scarves that still faintly held her. Scent. Inside, they found treasures that took their breath away. Asterisk. There were letters, dozens of them. Letters for Emma's 10th birthday, her first day off middle school, her 16th birthday, her high school graduation, her wedding day. Each envelope carefully labeled in Sarah's handwriting. Each one a message of love sent forward through time. That there were letters for Thomas, too. For their wedding anniversary, for Father's Day, 4th day Emma would leave for college, for the moment when he might be ready to love again. Sarah had tried to imagine every milestone, every moment of joy and sorrow that would come after her death, and she had written her love into the future. But there was something else in that box, something that made both Thomas and Emma catch their breath. It was a journal, Sarah's private journal from the last months of her life. And on the first page, she had written instructions for when it should be read. Thomas and Emma, read this together when you've found your way back to each other. You'll know when the time is right. Asterisk. That night, sitting in the living room where Emma had once called 911 because it hurt Tozit, father and daughter read Sarah's journal together. What they discovered was a woman who had been far more aware of their struggles than either of them. Had realized that Sarah had written about watching Thomas retreat into himself, about her fears that his grief would isolate him from Emma. She had written about noticing Emma trying to mimic her positions, about understanding that her daughter was trying to take on her pain out of love. She had written about the letter she was planning to leave for Emma, about her hopes that it would help her daughter understand that carrying someone else's suffering isn't love. It's a burden that love should never ask us to bear. But most importantly, Sarah had written about her dreams for their future. Not the future where she would be there to guide them, but the future where they would have to guide each other. She had written about her vision of Thomas becoming a counselor, helping their families navigate loss. She had written about Emma becoming an advocate for children who needed help finding their voices. Asterisk, it's like she could see the future, Emma whispered as they read page after page of Sarah's hopes and fears and dreams. It's like she knew exactly what would happen. Thomas was quiet for a long time before responding. She knew us, he finally said. Shek knew us well enough to imagine how we would heal, and she left us breadcrumbs to help us find our way. Asterisk, but the journal revealed something else, something that would prove to be just as important as all the letters and prophecies. In the final entries, Sarah had written about their families she had met during her treatments, families struggling with illness, loss, and children who are trying to be too strong. Too early. She had written about Marcus Williams, whose 8-year-old son tried to take care of his younger siblings, while his father battled addiction and his mother worked 3 jobs to keep food on the table. She had written about the Rodriguez family, whose teenage daughter had stopped eating because she thought if she could control her body, she could somehow control her father's deployment overseas. She had written about elderly Mrs. Chun, whose grandson was failing school because he spent all his time caring for her instead of studying. Asterisk, Sarah Henderson had been keeping a list of families who needed help, children who needed advocates, people who were suffering in silence just like Emma and Thomas would suffer after her death. And at the bottom of that list, she had written a note. If God gives Thomas and Emma the strength to heal their own family, maybe they can help heal these families too. Maybe our pain can become purpose. Maybe our loss can become love for others who are lost. Asterisk, reading that list felt like receiving marching orders from beyond the grave. It felt like Sarah Henderson was still trying to take care of people, still trying to make sure no child suffered alone, no family fell apart from grief they didn't know how to carry. Thomas called in sick to work the next day, something he hadn't done since returning after Sarah's funeral. Instead, he and Emma spent the day talking about what they had read, about what Sarah had seen in their future, about what it might mean to honor her memory by helping the families on her list. And that's how the Henderson Family Foundation began. Not as some grand philanthropic gesture, but as a 9-year-old girl and her father deciding to do what 80-ing women had dreamed they might do, turn their pain into purpose, their healing into help for others. They started small. Thomas reached out to Marcus Williams, whose family Sarah had met in the oncology waiting room. It turned out Marcus was struggling with more than addiction. He was struggling with the guilt of having cancer-causing chemicals in his worklist, struggling with insurance companies that wouldn't cover his treatments, struggling with watching his 8-year-old son try to be the man of the house. Thomas didn't have all the answers, but he had something just as valuable. He had the experience of nearly losing his daughter to his own grief, and the hard-won knowledge of how families can find their way back to each other. Emma, meanwhile, befriended Marcus's son, David. She recognized in him the same thing she had seen in herself, the too serious expression, the shoulders carrying weight they weren't meant to hold, the way he sat on the edge of chairs like he was ready to jump up and take care of whatever crisis might arise. It's okay to be 8 years old, she told David one afternoon as they sat in the Hendersons' backyard, teaching him how to sit comfortably in a lawn chair. It's okay to let the grown-ups figure out the grown-up problems. Asterisk, the Rodriguez family came next. Their daughter, Maria, had heard about Emma's story through the school counselor and had asked if she could meet the girl who had been brave enough to call for help. What followed was a friendship that would teach both girls about different kinds of strength, different ways of carrying worry, different approaches to healing. Maria had been trying to control her environment by controlling her body, believing that if she could make herself small enough, invisible enough, perfect enough, she could somehow keep her father safe overseas and her mother happy at home. Emma helped her understand that love doesn't require self-erasure, that taking care of family doesn't mean disappearing yourself. But perhaps the most profound connection came through Mrs. Chun. The elderly woman's grandson was sacrificing his education to be her caregiver. When Emma met 12-year-old Jason Chun, she saw something that broke her heart. A child who had taken on adult responsibilities, not out of love, but out of fear that no one else would step up if he didn't. I take care of Grandma, because if I don't, who will? Jason explained during their first conversation. My parents work all day, and she can't be alone. Emma understood that weight, that sense of being the only thing standing between something you love and disaster. But she also understood something Jason didn't yet know, that accepting help doesn't mean abandoning responsibility. And that's sometimes messy. Most loving thing you can do is make sure there are other adults involved in solving adult problems. Working with these families taught Thomas and Emma something crucial about their own healing journey. They learned that their story wasn't unique. There were children everywhere, trying to carry burdens too heavy for their small shoulders, families everywhere falling apart under the weight of circumstances beyond their control. But they also learned that healing is contagious, that when one family finds their way back to wholeness, it creates possibility for other families to heal too. That children who have been taught to ask for help become children who can teach other children that asking for help is safe. Within a year, the Henderson Family Foundation was working with 15 families. Within 12 years, they had partnered with the school district to create support groups for children dealing with family illness, loss, and trauma. Within 3 years, they had expanded to include family counseling services, emergency financial assistance for families in medical crisis, and advocacy programs that helped children find their voices when they needed to speak up about problems. At home, but the Foundation's most innovative program was something Emma designed herself. She called it Phone Friend, a system where children who had successfully navigated family crises were paired with children who were just beginning to face similar challenges, not as counselors or therapists, but as friends who understood what it felt like to be small in a world full of big problems. Emma became the program's first phone friend, taking calls from children who had heard her story and needed someone to talk to who would understand what it meant to heart in ways that were hard to explain. She taught them what she had learned from her mother's letters, that being strong enough to ask for help is different from being strong enough to carry everything alone. These weren't just success stories, my friend. There were setbacks, failures, families that couldn't be helped despite everyone's best efforts. Thomas learned that becoming a grief counselor didn't make him immune to his own grief, that helping other families didn't erase the pain of losing Sarah. Emma learned that being a young advocate meant sometimes carrying stories that were heavier than her own, that listening to other children's pain could reopen wounds she thought had healed. But they also learned that purpose doesn't eliminate pain, it transforms it. That serving others doesn't cure your own suffering, but it gives your suffering meaning. That healing isn't about forgetting what hurt you, but about using what hurt you to prevent others from hurting in the same way. By the time Emma turned 11, 4 years after her first 911 call, the Henderson Family Foundation had helped over 100 families navigate crises ranging from serious illness to deployment. From addiction to financial catastrophe. Emma had spoken at conferences in 12 states, had been featured in national magazines, and had received awards from organizations she couldn't even pronounce. But if you asked her what she was most proud of, she wouldn't mention the awards or media attention. She would tell you about David Williams, who learned to be 8 years old while his father got the help he needed. She would tell you about Maria Rodriguez, who learned to eat regular meals and trust that her father's safety wasn't dependent on her disappearing. She would tell you about Jason Chun, who learned that loving his grandmother meant making sure she had multiple sources of support, not making himself her only caregiver. She would tell you about all the children who had called the phone friend hotline and learned that they weren't alone, that their problems weren't too big to solve, that asking for help was the first step toward finding solutions. Asterisk, but most of all, she would tell you about the letter she found on her 11th birthday, the letter from her mother that had been waiting for this exact day, this exact moment when Emma was old enough to understand what her mother had really been trying to tell her. My dearest Emma, if you're reading this, it means you survived not just my death, but everything that came after. It means you found your voice and learned to use it. It means you discovered that your pain could become your power, that your healing could become hope for others. I always knew you were destined for extraordinary things, my brave girl. But I also knew that extraordinary things often begin with ordinary moments of courage, like a 7-year-old picking up a phone and admitting she needed help. You were never meant to carry my pain, Emma, but you were always meant to use your own pain to help others heal. You were always meant to be the voice that says it's safe to ask for help, safe to admit you're hurting, safe to let other people love you back to wholeness. Keep being brave, my beautiful daughter. Keep helping other children find their voices. Keep showing the world that the strongest thing any of us can do is admit when we need each other. I love you beyond words, beyond time, beyond death itself. Forever your mama. Sarah. Asterisk. That night, as Emma sat in her bedroom reading and rereading her mother's final birthday letter, she realized something that took her breath away. Her mother had been right about everything. About Thomas becoming a counselor, about Emma becoming an advocate, about their pain becoming purpose. But more than that, Sarah had been right about the fundamental truth that had started it all. That love means helping each other heal, not taking on each other's pain. That being strong means asking for help when you need it, not suffering in silence. That the bravest thing any of us can do is admit we're human, admit we're hurting, admit we need each other. Asterisk. Now, my friend, as we approach the end of this story, I want you to understand something that goes beyond the facts I've been sharing with you. This story, Emma's story, is really every story. It's the story of how we all learn to carry pain, how we all struggle to ask for help, how we all must decide whether our suffering will become a source of wisdom or a weight that drags us down. Asterisk. Every single one of us has sat in uncomfortable positions, metaphorically speaking. Every single one of us has tried to understand pain by mimicking it, has tried to show love by taking on burdens that weren't ours to carry. Every single one of us has been 7-year-old Emma Henderson at some point in our lives, hurting in ways we couldn't explain, needing help we didn't know how to ask for. The difference is that Emma was brave enough to pick up that phone. She was brave enough to say, "It hurts when I sit." She was brave enough to let strangers see her pain and to trust that help might be possible. Asterisk. But here's what I've learned in my 78 years on this earth. What Emma's story taught me, and what I hope it teaches you. The phone is always there. The number is always 911, or it's a friend's number, or it's a counselor's number, or it's a teacher's number, or it's a pastor's number, or it's a doctor's number. The help is always available if we're brave enough to reach for it. We live in a world that teaches us that asking for help is weakness, that carrying our pain alone is somehow noble, that struggling in silence is preferable to admitting we need support. But Emma Henderson proved that wrong. A 7-year-old girl proved that wrong. The truth is that every day, in communities all across this country and around this world, there are children sitting in positions that hurt them because they think that's how they show love. There are adults drowning in grief, while the people they love most watch helplessly from the sidelines. There are families falling apart, not because they don't love each other, but because they don't know how to help each other heal. Emma's story matters not just because it has a happy ending, but because it shows you that healing is possible, that families can find their way back to each other, that communities can wrap their arms around their most vulnerable members, that one person's courage to speak their truth can create ripples that reach farther than anyone could imagine. Asterisk, but there's something else Emma's story teaches us, something that took me years to fully understand. It's not just about asking for help when we need it, though that's crucial. It's about creating the kind of world where asking for help feels safe, where our children know they'll be believed and supported, where families understand that strength comes from connection, not from isolation. 5 years after Emma's first 911 call, she received a letter that would remind her why her story mattered beyond her own family's healing. It came from a girl named Sophia Martinez in Arizona. No relation to Officer Jenny Martinez. Just one of those beautiful coincidences that life sometimes offers us. Sophia was 8 years old when she wrote to Emma, and her letter was both heartbreaking and hopeful. Dear Emma, my teacher told me about you and how you called for help when you were hurting. I want to tell you about my friend Carlos. He sits funny at school like you used to, and his stomach hurts all the time, but he won't tell anyone why. I think his daddy might be hitting him, but Carlos says daddies are supposed to hit kids when they're bad, and that if he tells anyone, his daddy will go to jail, and his mama will be sad. I told him about you, about how asking for help made things better for your family. Both scared. Can you tell me what to say to help him be brave like you were brave? Your friend, Sophia Emma, was 12 years old when she received that letter, old enough to understand that Sophia was describing a situation very different from her own, but similar in one crucial way. A child was suffering in silence because he believed that asking for help would make things worse instead of better. With her father's guidance, Emma wrote back to Sophia with advice that would eventually become part of the Henderson Foundation's educational materials. Dear Sophia, thank you for caring about Carlos enough to want to help him. That's what real friends do. They notice when someone is hurting and they don't pretend everything is okay when it's not. Here's what I've learned. Sometimes kids think that protecting grown-ups is more important than protecting themselves. But kids should never have to protect grown-ups from other grown-ups' bad choices. That's not a kid's job. Carlos needs to know that if his daddy is hurting him, that's not because Carlos is bad. That's because his daddy needs help learning how to be a better daddy. And the only way his daddy can get that help is if someone tells the right grown-ups what single quotes as happening. Can you help Carlos understand that when grown-ups hurt kids, it's the grown-up who gets in trouble, not the kid? Can you help him see that there are grown-ups whose job it is to keep kids safe, and those grown-ups can't do their job if nobody tells them when kids are in danger? Most importantly, can you help Carlos see that asking for help isn't tattling or being disloyal to family? It's being brave enough to say that everyone in the family deserves to be safe and happy, including him. You're already being so brave by looking out for your friend. Keep being brave for him until he can be brave for himself. Your friend, Emma *. That exchange led to Carlos getting the help he needed, to his father getting counseling for anger management and addiction, to his family learning healthier ways to handle stress and conflict. But more importantly, it led to Emma understanding that her story wasn't just about her family's healing. It was about changing how children think about their own safety, their own worth, their own right to ask for help. Asterisk over the next few years. Emma received hundreds of letters from children and adults who had heard her story and found the courage to speak up about their own situations. Letters from teenagers dealing with eating disorders, from elderly people suffering abusing nursing, homes from women trapped in domestic violence situations, from men struggling with depression and addiction. Each letter taught Emma something new about the complexity of human suffering. About many ways people try to protect others by sacrificing themselves. About the courage it takes to believe that help is possible even when your situation seems hopeless. Asterisk, but perhaps the most important letter came from an unexpected source. Carl Stevens, the 911 operator who had taken Emma's original call. 5 years later, Carol wrote to Emma to tell her how that single phone call had changed not just emergency dispatch protocols, but Carol's entire approach to her job. Dear Emma, you probably don't remember me, but I was the operator who answered your call 5 years ago when you said it hurt when you sat. I want you to know that your voice has been with me every single day since then. Your call taught me to listen differently, to hear not just the immediate crisis, but the deeper pain that sometimes hides behind simple statements, to ask different questions, to give people space to explain what they really need, to understand that sometimes the greatest calls are the ones that sound the most ordinary. Because of you, I've been able to help dozens of other children who called. 911, not because of immediate physical danger, but because they were drowning in emotional pain and didn't know where else to turn. I've learned to recognize the signs of childhood oppression, family dysfunction, and trauma that traditional emergency protocols might miss. Your courage to ask for help that day didn't just save your family. It created ripples that have reached families I've never met, children whose names I'll never know, situations that might have ended tragically if not for the lessons you taught me about listening with me heart instead of just my training. Thank you for being brave enough to pick up that phone. Thank you for trusting a stranger with your pain. Thank you for showing all of us that sometimes the most important emergencies are the ones that can't be seen, only heard if we know how to listen. With gratitude and respect. Carl Stevens * reading. Carol's letter. Emma realized something that took her breath away. She had thought her story was about a little girl who got help, but really, her story was about how an act of courage can teach an entire community to be more compassionate, more observant, more ready to respond when someone needs help. It was about how asking for help doesn't just change your own life. It changes the lives of everyone who gets to be part of helping you heal. It teaches them that their skills matter, that their compassion matters, that they have something valuable to offer to people who are struggling. By the time Emma turned 13, the Henderson Family Foundation had expanded beyond anything Thomas and Emma could have imagined in those first dark months after Sarah's death. They had helped over 500 families, trained thousands of teachers and healthcare workers to recognize signs of childhood trauma and create separate networks in 42 states. But the foundation's greatest achievement wasn't measured in numbers. It was measured in the stories. Stories of children who had found their voices, families who had found their way back to each other, communities that had learned to wrap their arms around their most vulnerable members. Stories like the Johnson family in Oregon, where a grandfather's Alzheimer's diagnosis had led his 10-year-old granddaughter to try to become his caregiver until she learned from Emma's phone friend program that children could love their grandparents without sacrificing their own childhoods. Stories like the Patel family in Texas, where parents working multiple jobs to make ends meet had been so focused on providing financial security that they hadn't realized their teenage son was struggling with anxiety and depression until he heard Emma speak at a school assembly and found the courage to ask for help. Stories like the Murphy family in Maine, where a military deployment had left a single mother trying to manage 3 young children alone until the Henderson Foundation connected her with resources and support that helped the family stay strong during their separation. Asterisk, each story reinforced the same fundamental truth that Emma had learned from her mother's letters, that love isn't about carrying each other's burdens alone. It's about creating networks of support, strong enough to hold everyone when they need holding, wise enough to know when to step in and when to step back, brave enough to ask the hard questions and gentle enough to listen to the answers. Emma's story had become a template, a proof of concept that healing is possible, that families can survive devastating loss and come out stronger, that children can be both protected and empowered, that asking for help is the beginning of every recovery story, not the end. But if you had asked Emma on her 13th birthday what she had learned from her journey, she wouldn't have talked about statistics or programs or national recognition. She would have talked about something much simpler and much more profound. She would have told you that she had learned to sit comfortably, not just physically, though her body had long since healed from the damage caused by those months of contorted positions, but emotionally, spiritually, she had learned to sit comfortably with herself, with her grief, with her memories of her mother, with her purpose in the world. That she had learned that healing doesn't mean forgetting. It means learning to carry love and loss together, learning to honor what was lost while still making space for what could be found. It means understanding that the people we love don't disappear when they die. They transform into the wisdom we carry, the courage we discover, the compassion we offer to others who are walking similar paths. Asterisk, most importantly, Emma had learned that her mother's death hadn't been the end of their relationship. It had been the beginning of a different kind of relationship. Sarah Henderson was still teaching her daughter, still guiding her choices, still influencing her path. But instead of doing it through daily conversations and bedtime hugs, she was doing it through letters that arrived at exactly the right moments, through wisdom that had been planted years earlier and was only now beginning to bloom. Emma carried her mother with her not as pain to be endured, but as love to be shared, not as a wound that wouldn't heal, but as a source of strength that would never run dry, not as a burden that made her smaller, but as a purpose that made her larger than Shiva could have been on her own. Asterisk, and that, my friend, is the deepest truth of Emma Henderson's story. It's not just that asking for help can save your life, though it can. It's not just that healing is possible after devastating loss, though it is. It's not just that one person's courage can change a world, though it might. The deepest truth is that love doesn't end when life ends. Love transforms. Love multiplies. Love finds new ways to express itself, new channels to flow through, new lives to touch and heal and inspire. Sarah Henderson's love for her daughter didn't die with her body. It lived on in every letter she had written, every lesson she had taught, every moment of courage Emma found when she needed it most. It lived on in Thomas's transformation from a broken nun into a healer of broken families. It lived on in every child who found their voice through Emma's example, every family who learned to ask for help because the Henderson family had shown them it was safe to do so. Asterisk, love lived on in a foundation that would outlast all of them, in policies that would protect children for generations, in a culture that was slowly learning to see asking for help notice weakness, but as wisdom, not as failure, but as the first step toward healing. Emma Henderson's 911 call, those 4 simple words, "It hurts when I sit," had become an anthem for anyone who had ever suffered in silence, anyone who had ever carried burdens too heavy for their shoulders, anyone who had ever needed to be reminded that they deserved help, deserved healing, deserved love. Asterisk, I think about Carol Stevens sometimes, the 911 operator who took Emma's call. That September morning, she told a reporter years later that Emma's voice changed how she listened to every call that came after. She said that Emma taught her to hear not just the immediate crisis, but the deeper pain that sometimes hides behind simple statements. "It hurts when I sit" became a metaphor in Carol's mind for all the ways people try to tell us they're struggling without actually saying the words. The elderly man who calls about a suspected break-in, but really just needs someone to talk to because he hasn't spoken to another human being in days. The teenager who reports vandalism, but is really trying to get help for a situation at home she doesn't know how to name. Emma's call taught all of us to listen deeper, to hear the pain behind few words, to recognize that sometimes the bravest thing a person can do is admit they need help, and the most important thing the rest of us can do is be ready to provide it. Asterisk, I think about Jenny Martinez, too, the officer who first responded to Emma's call. She left police work 3 years later to become a family therapist specializing in childhood trauma. She says that Emma showed her that sometimes law enforcement isn't just about enforcing laws. Sometimes it's about enforcing the fundamental law of human decency, the law that says no child should suffer alone, the law that says asking for help should always be met with compassion and action. And I think about David Chun, who still patrols the streets and now carries business cards for every mental health resource in the county. He hands them out not just to people in crisis, but to anyone who might someday need to help someone else in crisis. He says, Emma taught him that police officers are often the first responders, not just talkrooms, but to broken hearts, to families in pain, to communities that have forgotten how to take care of their most vulnerable members. Asterisk, but mostly, I think about Thomas Henderson, who learned that the greatest gift he could give his daughter was not protecting her from pain, but teaching her how to carry it without being crushed by it. Who learned that honoring his wife's memory meant not just missing her, but living in ways that would make her proud. Thomas tells his clients now, the families who sit in his office, carrying burdens they think they have to bear alone, that grief is not something you get over. It's something you learn to carry differently. It's something you learn to transform from a weight that drags you down into a bridge that connects you to deeper compassion, deeper understanding, deeper love. Asterisk and Emma Henderson, who is 11 years old now and still growing into the woman she will become. Emma carries within her a truth that could change the world if now people understood it. That vulnerability is not weakness, that asking for help is not failure, that admitting we're hurt is the first step toward healing. She carries that truth not just in her mind, but in her body, in the way she sits comfortably now, in the way she moves through the world without trying to accommodate invisible pain, in the way she reaches out to other children who are struggling because she remembers what it felt like to hurt alone. Asterisk, and so, my friend, we come to the end of Emma Henderson's story. But in another way, we're just at the beginning. Because this story of a little girl who was brave enough to say she was hurting and ask for help, this story continues every single day. It continues every time a child finds the courage to tell a trusted adult that something is wrong. It continues every time a parent recognizes that their own pain might be affecting their ability to see their child's needs. It continues every time a community decides that no family should face crisis alone. Asterisk, it continues every time someone picks up the phone. Asterisk, maybe you're listening to this story and recognizing something in yourself. Maybe you're carrying pain in uncomfortable positions, metaphorically speaking. Maybe you're trying to understand someone else's suffering by taking it into your own body, your own heart, your own mind. Maybe you're drowning in your own grief while someone who loves you is watching helplessly from the sidelines. Maybe you're the 7-year-old Emma, hurting in ways you can't explain, needing help you don't know how to ask for. Maybe you're Thomas Henderson, so lost in your own pain that you can't see past it to recognize the needs of the people who depend on you. Maybe you're Sarah Henderson, looking at your family and knowing that your love alone ain't enough to protect them from the pain that's coming. Asterisk, if you are, I want you to know something that Emma Henderson learned on a September morning when she was 7 years old. The phone is always there. The help is always available. The number might be 911, or it might be a friend's number, or a counselor's number, or a teacher's number, or a doctor's number, or a crisis helpline, or a family member who's been waiting for you to reach out. The specific number doesn't matter. What matters is having the courage to dial it. What matters is being brave enough to say, I'm hurting and I need help. Asterisk Emma Henderson taught us that asking for help isn't giving up, it's growing up. It's recognizing that we were never meant to carry the heaviest burdens alone. It's understanding that love sometimes means letting other people help us love the people who care about most. She taught us that healing is possible, that families can find their way back to each other, that communities can learn to recognize and respond to pain before it becomes crisis. She taught us that sometimes the smallest voices carry the most important messages, and that listening, really listening, can change everything. Asterisk, most importantly, she taught us that our pain doesn't have to be the end of our story. It can be the beginning of our purpose. It can be the bridge that connects us to deeper compassion, deeper understanding, deeper love. Emma's physical pain led her to make a phone call that saved her family and touched thousands of other lives. Her emotional pain became the foundation for a lifetime of helping other children find their voices and ask for help. Her loss became her gift to the world. Asterisk. And so, my friend, as I finish telling you Emma Henderson's story, I want to leave you with the words that Sarah Henderson wrote to her daughter. Words that have reached far beyond one little girl to touch hearts all over the world. When something is too big to carry by yourself, that doesn't mean you're not strong enough. It just means you need to find someone strong enough to help you carry it. Asterisk. The phone is always there. The help is always available. All you have to do is be brave enough to reach for it. And sometimes, my friend, that's the most heroic thing any of us can do. Asterisk, this has been the story of Emma Henderson, the little girl who called 911 and said, "Itherts when I sit," and in doing so, taught a world how to listen, how to help, and how to heal. Remember her courage, honor her truth. And if you ever find yourself hurting in positions that weren't meant for you to hold, pick up the phone. Someone is always waiting to help you learn to sit comfortably again.